Good evening. Thank you all for coming to Fremont. I want to extend my gratitude and thanks to Silicon Valley Generative AI group here in Fremont, especially to Sharmi and to Suju. Suji and I have go all the way back to the Hadoop days. So it kind of dates us today to talk about generative AI today in the world of Gen AI. And how do we actually compete with people like Ryan? Right, and Ryan's talk was a perfect segue into what I'm going to talk about today. And when I was thinking about presenting this at a meetup, I struggled a bit about what am I going to talk about today when the field of software development is changing at the pace that we actually never seen before in our lives. The velocity with which it actually changes is amazing. We haven't seen anything like that in 70 years. And so I struggled. I said, well, why not talk about how we as software engineers today, gripped by this storm of agentic AI, thrive? How do we actually thrive in this area? So that's what the talk today is going to be about. And Ryan was a perfect segue to talk about how software development landscape is actually changing, how it's equaling the field that anybody can actually do things today without actually having a PhD in mathematics or computer science, because we have the tools and the agentic tools that we're going to work with. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I asked Claude, who am I? And the bastard told me, you don't have any money, I'm not going to tell you, who you are. So I moved over to ChatGTP and asked, who am I? And he gave me nice little phrases with emojis saying that you are a technical staff developer with Databricks doing advocacy efforts for a long time. You're an MLflow contributor. You're the author of the Learning Spark, the second edition, and you worked with all these different companies. And I've had the good fortune, really, I was talking to one of the gentlemen over here. I've lived in Fremont for 30 years, and I've been working in the Valley for the last 35 years. And I had the good fortune, I was just there at the right time, at the right moment to have the opportunity to work at this very companies who were at the forefront of innovation. Netscape, Opsware, Databricks, Sun Microsystem, Loud Cloud, and then back to Databricks again. So a little bit about myself, and I just want to have an idea about who you guys are, because it's important for me to figure out, where you guys come from, so that way I have an understanding. So how many of you actually have used Git Copilot? Are you still using Git Copilot? It was quite exciting back then, wasn't it? It auto-completed your code?
Yeah, but it's better now.
I know, that's what I'm asking. Yeah, it was, right? But back then, in the early days, when you completed because you was doing static analysis of your code, but back then, when you completed the line, you go, fuck, this is great, right? And then recently, Jules came out. That's me, right? No, I'm just kidding, just for namesake. Jules came out from Google, which is a coding agent that was released about a couple of months ago. I started using it, and I was having nausea just looking at the color. So I decided to abandon it. Anybody using Claude Code? Everybody using Claude Code? Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. It's a sort of a terminal-based tool, but it works very well with it. And we'll get into that. ChatGPT, we saw Ryan talking about. How many of you are using ChatGPT? Okay, the most recent one, the 5.0 that came out. Claude, people are using Claude. What are you using for? Can anybody want to share me what you're using Claude on a daily basis for?
Mostly coding tasks.
Mostly coding. But you're not using Claude Code, but you're using just the Claude itself.
If I use GitHub Copilot, I use Claude Sonnet.
Okay. Gemini?
Gemini, recently signed up for
Mm-hmm.
and notebook.
And then Cursor, anybody using Cursor? People are using Cursor? Okay, brilliant. And then OpenAI actually just came up with the Codex. Anybody using the MCP tools, Modal Context Protocol, something that Anthropic actually released earlier this year. So it's good to know that actually the people are actually quite familiar with it, right? And so here's my TLDR today for the talk. If you can't pay attention, this is what you should take away home with you. AI is actually changing the way we're going to be writing code, how software development landscape is actually changing. There is no debate about it. I can publicly debate you for endlessly, but we are actually changing the way we're going to be writing code. in the next 10 years. And we're going to be collaborating with the AI. Just you saw Ryan's example, how he was actually using LLM to find out what would be my next move. And it actually gave him that velocity to increase development. If he didn't have LLM, it would have probably taken him about 6 months to finish the project. But he could do it in what, 8 weeks? 4 weeks. Because of the fact that he was cooperating with the AI to help him shepherd the finish of the product. We are still early, right? Things are changing daily, bi-hourly, bi-weekly, and monthly. So we're quite early. We don't know exactly what it is. But the important thing for us to thrive in this particular area, that we have to have what I call an adaptive mindset. We have to embrace it, and we have to be in charge of telling LLM exactly what to do. And what Ryan was talking about, shepherding it to tell it to where to actually do by you being familiar with what the end product is, and you're prompting it to guiding in that particular right direction. I'll get into what I mean by that. So, anybody heard about Andhra Karpathy? Okay. Andhra Karpathy was sort of a visionary for computer vision and deep learning. And he was working at Tesla just down the road. You guys came over and saw Tesla. Before that, and then he went to OpenAI. And he gave a talk about 2 years ago when he was advocating, self-driving car, and he was talking about computer vision. A title called "Software is Changing." Right? This was, during the time of deep learning, which is about just less than 10 years ago. Most recently, just 3 months ago, he gave a talk at Y Combinator to a bunch of new AI engineers, and he called it "Software is Changing Again." Right? And his premise was that we actually haven't seen software change so much in the last 70 years. But what we actually have seen, it changed the last few years. We have never seen that change before. And he labels this thing called Software 3.x, which is a seismic shift in how we're going to be interacting with the AI code. And that's going to be through the natural language, right? We're going to be prompting, we're going to be shepherding, we're going to be asking it to do things. And that's what he means by Software 3.x. So let me just give you a quick example of what I mean by that, right? If we look at the evolution of how the software, according to Karpathy, has evolved over the last 20, 30 years, Software 1.0, long time ago, we wrote the computer code. We wrote the assembly code, we wrote the Fortran code, we wrote the Pascal code, the C++, all that code we wrote by hand, and that programmed the computer. It programmed the computer in what we actually told it to, and so we were completely in control of what the behavior and what the results were of the particular output. Fast forward a few years ago, neural networks came into prominence, first by AlexNet. And the way we actually program those neural networks is that we give some sort of a training data, we randomize some weights, and through some back propagation, through those particular programs, we actually created a neural net, which then became the first classifier called AlexNet in 2012. What happened past in the last 5 or 6 years, Software 3.0 changed completely. We are not writing code at this particular point. We are writing prompts. We are giving prompts, English prompts, that programs the neural networks, that programs the transformer. And this has been the seismic shift I'm talking about, that we go from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0. And that's what Karpathy is talking about, that the way we're going to be interacting with the new software stack is not through writing code, but actually writing prompts through the natural language. So just give you a concrete example, what do I mean by that? Take a classical example of how you actually would write a sentiment classical analysis, say in 1.0. You write a particular Python program that you have a bag of words that says negative words and positive words, and you parse the particular sentence, and if it matches that, you label that as a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment. In Software 2.0, the way you actually program the classifier is that you give training data, positive training data and negative training data, and you give a binary classifier that now churns out the parameters, and at the end, you actually have the parameters that you can actually use to classify something. In 3.0, you do few short prompt programming by English prompts. You just give three examples, and what you actually end up having is a classifier. So that is sort of the shift of how things are changing. And what he means by that is the way things actually changed since the birth of ChatGPT, which was in November 22nd, to all the way we are today. The red box that you're actually saying is also what Karpathy labels it as the software stack of 3.0, right? And what's changing so rapidly, that's actually tailing daily, is the things in green box. The models are getting bigger, the models are getting faster, they're getting more intelligent, they have reason capabilities, they have chain thought processes, they can look at the task and give you a plan of how they're going to attempt the task. And they're self-correcting. They would do something. If something goes wrong, they would go back, right? So it gives you the confidence that, oh, I'm actually now self-correcting myself. And this is what's actually changing the seismic shift that we have. The 3.0 is the entire stack. These is moving very fast. And today we have agents that actually generate code in an amazing way. That's what Karpati was talking about. And the TLDI, the software is actually changing under a seismic shift. We are going to be working with the AI, and our daily workflows are going to be changing quite a bit. But this seismic shift actually brings a lot of uncertainty and a lot of opportunity at the same time. So where is the uncertainty coming from, right? If you ask yourself, when you hear the CEOs of the hyperscalers saying that 30% of the code today in Microsoft is being written by AI. Right? That's a huge number. If you look at 30% of all the code, new code has been generated is generated by AI. How far that's true, I don't know, but that's a huge claim coming from Satya. If you look at the second claim by the founder of Anthropic, Dario, says that all the code in the next year is going to be written by AI. That's very bullish, right? But if you start looking at it, that's pretty close to reality. We are writing a lot of code which is going to be generated by AI. The more tempered statement was by Chief Scientist Jeff Dean, who said that within the year, the agentic code generators will be like a junior programmer. And to me, this sounds a bit more realistic, for me at least. I assert that I think in the next 5 or 6 years, these core agents are going to be something that we will be working with as a collaborative agent. Think of it as a pair programming. So when you hear statements like this, I think we stop not asking ourselves, am I getting obsolete, right? Am I just being programmed into oblivion and equating to these AI agents who are replacing me? Or am I going to be part and parcel in shepherding how I'm going to detect how the agent is going to behave? And I think that's more of a reality. So how do we actually know that's particular reality? And surprisingly, there was this guy called Pragmatic Engineer, and what he did was that he went around talking to these 4 different companies or 4 different industries across the particular stack to find out how they're actually using this particular patterns, how they're actually adopting, how much AI is actually being used. And if you get a chance, listen to this particular talk, there's a QR code, but I'm just going to summarize some of his findings, and I'll concentrate on the AI development tools and individual software people who we all are here that affects us. So his TLDR was that AI startups, the companies who are actually building this high-scale LLM, and the people in the companies who are actually using these agentic frameworks to write new applications, have the highest adoption rate. And they are moving it fast, they're adopting it, they're also even putting some of it in production. The big tech companies are a bit cautious, right? They're sort of like focusing more on how I can actually take tedious tasks that I have, that I can automate that, so that I have more control over it, because I don't want to acquire or I don't want to inherit what they call the tech debt. Because when you actually have code that's being generated by something and you just put in production and something goes wrong, you have 10,000 lines of code that's computer generated, you have no idea, right? So you could be dealing in fire. So they're actually dealing with in a very cautious way. They know that they have to adopt, but they're being cautious. And the independent engineers, like people like you are here in the room, including Ryan, are sort of embracing that, the growing enthusiasm, adapting ways to do that, and how to actually use that. So let's look at each of these and see how the findings were when you actually went and did the survey, and how that's actually affecting the landscape as we move forward. So at Anthropic, Boris Charny is the guy who actually developed Cloud Code. Right? He's the guy who's the founder or the creator of Cloud Code. And he said that we are just scratching the surface, which is what Andhra Karpati said, that we are moving at a very fast pace, that red box and green box is moving, and we're just at the surface, which echoes what Karpati says. And we're going to such a fast pace that every day things are changing quickly. And we actually haven't even come to the point where we've really fully realized the potential of this particular LLMs. And more conversation at the Anthropic developers revealed that when Claude Code, remember Claude Code was an internal project. It wasn't going to be a product. But when they realized how the internal engineers actually using it, they decided to release it. And they claimed that 90% of the code in Claude Code is written by Claude. Right? It sort of takes you back to the early days. I don't know how many, I'm going to date myself. In the early days, when we actually had compilers, we didn't have the entire compiler written. We had the little kernel written in assembly language that bootstraps the code, and then it generates, and then it compiles it. Right? Same thing with the early days in how Unix was actually booted. The VM Linux would actually be down from the internet. VM Linux would come up, and then it would download the loaders and the compilers and all the tools, compile it, and then now you actually have a full-blown operating system. So this is kind of the way how history is repeating itself. The code is actually generating code, the code itself. And their TLDR was that Claude Code usage has climbed since the day they released. They released that this early in April, and they saw a 40% increase of downloads in the first day. They've seen an increasing of 160% since it actually has gone into public preview. And now, Cloud Code is part of the onboarding process. So in other words, when you join Anthropic today as a software engineer, you won't have a mentor. Your mentor is going to be Cloud Code. You're going to be asking Cloud Code, how do I actually file this PR? How do I fix this particular? Explain me how this particular code. So they realized that by onboarding computers with Cloud Code, these engineers who actually came on board saw the productivity of their mentors or their new engineers go increasingly fast. It took them within 6 weeks to really understand the entire code base. Why? Because you could ask Cloud Code, explain me what this particular function does. Explain me what this particular module does. Explain me what is the connecting parts of how this actually works. And it would actually explain you line by line in a way that your mentor wouldn't be able to do that. So they could actually adopt and understand the code very quickly just by using Cloud Code. And one of the things that really has increased this velocity and has appealed to people using Claude or using LLM is the release of Modal Context Protocol. And what Modal Context Protocol allows you to do is that it extends the capabilities of LLM to include and talk to external tools which you didn't have the ability to do that in order to augment the context of the query so that now LLM can actually understand and give you a better answer. And once Anthropic released that early in February, all the other big players like OpenAI and Google and Cursor sort of provided the support so you can actually configure MCP server. And MCP server just allows you to, your agent to talk to external tools, to embed or to augment the context. So now the LLM actually has better understanding and answer a question well. So that really, really took off. And so what about seasoned programmers that you all are? What about how people are actually adopting that? So let's start with Armin Ronachar. He's the creator of Flask, Ninja 2, and the founder of Sentry. And initially, he was very skeptical. He said, I don't believe that I would trust an agent to generate all the particular code. But he started playing around with it, and he came to realize that Cloud Code is pretty good, right? Once I actually started playing around with it, I began to have the confidence to get over the hurdles that I had initially as skepticism. And he confessed quite openly that I currently don't sleep at all at night. Because for me, Cloud Code has become a catnip. It's like a drug. I'm staying away. I've never seen so much energized. I've never seen so much excitement in my life because the way it actually allows me to be creative and the way it allows me to show what things it can actually do, I've never seen anything like that before. And he went ahead and made this public statement. I don't know if Anthropic paid for it, but this is a really resounding endorsement by saying Cloud Code got shockingly good, right? By using LLM extensively, I have gone over the hurdle because initially I was worried about the hallucinations, the fibbing and all that. But these tools have become so better at generating the code and correcting themselves that I have more confidence now in them than I had before, right? If you look at another creator of Django, he is a huge blogger on LLM. He's been writing LLM blogs for a number of years, and Karpathy is a big fan of it. If Karpathy endorses him, you should probably think about reading some of his code. And he started writing about saying that coding agents have really worked now. They've changed enormously in the last few years. And the modal improvements in the last months are incredible because now you have the ability to LLM to actually not only generate your code, but it can run compilers, it can run linters, it can self-correct itself, it can write tests, and it can fix those errors as well. As Ryan pointed out, if I got a particular error, all I did was take that particular error and put it in the chat GPT, and it would actually tell me exactly where the error is. Well, over here, you don't have to actually cut and paste. The cloud code will actually look at the error and self-analyze and correct itself. And that is a huge improvement from the early days when we were actually using that. So I want to get back into bringing Karpathy into the conversation. Karpathy came with this idea of how this agentic AI is going to change the landscape of how software developers are going to be working. And he believed that there's this notion of the circle of AI generation and AI verification, right? And he calls that partial autonomy. How many of you have Teslas here? Okay. I mean, Teslas, you have the self-driving pilot, and there's a slider there, right? The slider tells you how much autonomy you want to give it to the self-driving car and how much you actually want to control. So he took that particular idea when he was working at Tesla, and he sort of extended the analogy to the agentic AI writing code, is that you're going to have this particular circle called AI generation, how much of percentage of circle you're going to give AI to generate, and how much you're actually going to do that with verification. And over time, as the agents become more powerful and you have more confidence, this part of the loop is going to get bigger and the verification will get smaller. But initially, you have the control of what I call the autonomy slider, right? And one way he says that how developers are going to be using this particular cycle is putting the coding agent on a leash, so to speak, right? And when I say putting the coding agent leash, what they actually mean by it is that you are prompting and you are correcting and you're verifying. And you start with small tasks, like describe this single piece of code, tell me what it actually does. Or I have this particular JIRA, can you explain me what this particular JIRA does? Or if I were to fix this, what are the recommendations? What are the approaches you would take? So you're sort of prompting and you're working as a pair programmer with the AI, keeping the AI generation and verification always in your mind, keeping the agent in the leash. Whatever that you generate, you verify. When you're confident, you go to the next step. And that's sort of is the daily workflow that we actually are, and people are using it. How many of you are actually using this workflow today? Knowingly or unknowingly, you're doing partial autonomy, right? You're doing the verification because you ask the code, you ask the cursor, no, I don't want you to change this file. Why don't you try that? And that was the whole idea behind that. And if you see how this verification and generation is implemented in things like cursor, you have the traditional interface on the left-hand side, which has your code. And on the right-hand side, you have the AI generation, the AI integration, the context, where you're actually interacting with it. And you're telling it to go ahead and either change the file or change the code in place or don't, right? This is your autonomy slider that you control, right? If you just do Command I, it's just going to go ahead and do it, right? If you just do Command X, it's going to say, okay, I'm changing this file. Do you approve it? Yes, I do that. So the autonomy slider is up to you. You control how much of the autonomy you want to give to the cursor agent and how much you actually want to see for yourself the changes you're being made. Same thing, if you look at Claude, you can run Claude within the cursor, and when you generate and when you tell the cursor to do something, it's going to prompt you. Now you have the control by changing Claude.md to say, go ahead and just accept everything, or just go ahead and control everything, right? And so this is your LLM integration with Claude, and this is where it's going to take over your cursor window to say what you can do and what you can't do. So this is the new way of doing things, which is a cooperating way of asking the autonomy or asking the LLM to go ahead and do something, but verifying at the same time. Trust but verify, just like the politics, trust but verify. And Karpathy, we've sort of heard this thing, what I call 2025 is going to be the year of the agents, right? Agents are going to take over. He argues that no, agents are not going to take over. It's going to be about 10 years before we're going to have this full cycle where the agents will be actually doing everything, right? So we are actually quite a long ways to go, which kind of actually makes sense. People are not going to take everything that you actually produce by agent and put it in production, because now you incur the technical debt. So I want to switch a little bit the trend of the talk now, and I talk about how my group, our group that I work with, Apache Spark, how they're actually using GenAI and how we're actually embracing the agentic AI. Now, if you look at the early days, during the COVID, even post-COVID, if you had a question about Spark, if you had questions about Python, if you had questions about C++, where would you go? Stack Overflow, right? You always went to Stack Overflow, right? That was the, that was the place of truth. You actually went there. And how many of you have taken code from Stack Overflow, cut and paste, and put it in your code? You can admit it. I've done it many times. Anyway, okay. All right. So that was the source of truth, because people, shit, I'm not going to write this code. This thing is working. Somebody has given it 6 words. I'm just going to cut and paste and use it. What happened when ChatGPT came out, the Stack Overflow question traffic just went down, right? Just dropped. Similarly, within our Apache Spark data site, we actually saw a drop of 50% because people were using LLM to learn things. People like Ryan would actually go to ChatGPT to say, I have this particular problem. Can you give me an idea how I'd actually go about doing it? This was how things actually. Now, what's actually happened, that because of this proliferation of these tools, we actually are beginning to see that some of the websites are decreasing in terms of the traffic. And one of the things that people are actually doing to make sure that LLM can actually find things is that they are making this documentation and making their websites more LLM friendly. And there's a way you can actually generate an entire manifest of your docs, of your API docs, of your website by creating what they call LLM text, which is really a markdown version of the MD5 text so that the LLM can actually discover things. Now you've heard the thing called earlier, content is king, right? But in the context of Gen AI, context is everything, right? Context is a king. Because if you don't have the right context, you're going to have the wrong answers. So how are we actually using internally? When we bring our engineers on board, whether you're in Databricks engineering or with the Apache Spark, every development environment actually has a cursor, has a Goose. We're sort of timelining Goose, but now it's going to be cursor in Cloud Code. We have the ability to actually work with all of these LLM tools, and we have a set of MCP servers which are configured to work with our environment. And these MCP servers are nothing but, okay, I'm going to find out something about my Jira. I want to be integrated in my GitHub. I have my documentations in my Google Drive. I want to read the PRDs to find out. I want to look at my Confluent about all the stuff that's actually written. This MCP server gives the LLM the context and the developer to actually do that. So that's sort of the development environment. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of people over here. Anybody actually using this? Is your development environment where you actually have your desktop with a cursor, an MCP server configured using Claude or using anybody, right? So try that and you actually see. One thing you have to be careful about is that you don't want to have too many MCP server, because if you populate too many, if you block the context, the LLM will actually get confused. So you actually want to somehow tell the LLM to say, just use this particular for this particular task, just use these 3 MCP servers. And how are we actually using, we're experimenting a lot like everybody else, right? A typical day for me or a typical day for a developer in Spark would be, how is this particular Python class work? Explain it to me. Which is something very similar to what Boris told his engineers, that this is how we actually use Claude. So we are using the same way. I'm a new engineer, I come in, I've been given a task to fix a bug, I have no clue, right? If I go and ask a senior engineer, he's gonna explain me or she's gonna explain me, he or she actually wastes his time. I can actually go down in Claude and cursor and say, give me the definition of this particular class, tell me how it actually works. Or summarize this particular JIRA that was actually filed in Confluence to explain me what's it actually doing. How am I going to fix this particular bug? And it will actually give you step-by-step ways or recommendation, and then based on that, you actually start prompting and start using it. How do I expand this particular function to be able to actually do that? So these are the kind of the workflow on daily basis that a lot of developers are going to do, and this is what increases the velocity today, right? Today, the velocity is that when you start using this thing, you get instantaneous feedback, and you're able to take this particular code and try it right away. And as I said earlier, today, context is a king. So here's my example. We just recently released what's called PySpark API, but the PySpark API documentation was not released, right? I didn't have a context, I didn't have an MPC server to say, go use that. So I just promptly, deliberately say, you're an expert in PySpark internal, generate the Python source to fetch the daily news using the news API, using Python API, right? So we just made this thing up. Completely wrong implementation. It worked, but it was completely wrong. That's not what I asked it for. Why? Because it didn't have the context. It didn't have the new source of API or new source of documentation to say, this is the examples that I should use to learn from in order to generate what you're telling me to do. All I had to do was just share the context, right? I asked the cursor to go ahead and point to this particular PySpark data source that had all the recent examples and all the classes that you actually need to generate a new data source API to use it, and it went ahead and did it. Right? Why? Because now it has the right context. And all I had to do was just point to the right GitHub to say, use this particular example to generate that, and this is the new data source API derived from this particular class, whereas before, it didn't do it. Right? It just fibbed it, it just made it up. It looked believable, but you're not going to put that in production because that's completely wrong. What you were looking for is this. And the reason it actually did it correctly, because you provided the right context. So context is very important. How are the Databricks developers, the Databricks users actually using it? Same thing, right? The LLM agent that we actually have, the Databricks assistant, is context aware of everything within Databricks you're actually using it. So your notebook is your traditional interface. Your right-hand side is the agent, the LLM agent, which is actually going through the generation, and you actually going through the verification before you actually give the green light to go ahead and change the code. That's how the Databricks users are actually using the Databricks assistant to improve their productivity, and they're beginning to see enormous benefit. There are over 300 users, 300K users who are actually just using that. And you can configure your Databricks agent to use Sonnet or to use whatever the LLM they actually want. So essentially, that's my takeaway, right? AI is changing the way we are writing code today. That's undisputable. We're going to be collaborating quite a bit. Our productivity is going to increase because we are going to be shepherding the AI agent to do things for us. But we are still early. Things are going to change. And they're changing on a daily basis. And we actually have to adapt and thrive in order for us to actually survive. Otherwise, we're going to be submitted into oblivion. And there are a couple of things are coming up. I'm hosting a meetup called Spark Connect. Those who are still using Spark next month, come by and join us online. And we have a couple of other events coming up. So thanks a lot for the talk. I hope this was informative, and this is my ChatGPT generated conclusion that says, it is early, embrace the shift, experiment, empower, and thank you. Questions? Yes, Ajit.
How's your day-to-day in, say, 2 years from now?
Oh, I'm looking forward to get up in the morning and go straight to cloud code, right? I don't sleep, just like Sharma, I don't sleep at night because I'm just trying new things, right? I've never seen so much code generated and so much good code generated because, 6 months ago, it was crap, right? Now it's amazing. And you can control, you can actually tell us, don't be superfluous, exactly do what I'm asking you to do, right? And so most of my daily work is more about, okay, I've got this particular function, I want you to change this thing, but I want you to write a unit test for it, and does it. Generate all the documentation that I actually need to do that, and actually does that. If I had to do all that, it would take me a week, but I can do that within a couple of hours, right? But I do that with that AI generation verification and putting Cloud Code on a tight leash. And I can control that. I can control that by using Cloud MD, because with Cloud Code, you can actually generate what those Cloud MD, which are instructions for your project. You can have a top level project, you can have a local project, and you can control the behavior of that. And the good thing about Cloud is it's a terminal based. There's no GUI to it, but it can take over your GUI if you run from within, say, Cursor or within other tool. Thank you. Yes. Yes, Dave.
Other people are writing that is brand new code versus updating.
Good question. Good question. I think it actually varies from team to team. The question was that how much of the code today are people changing old code in production, and how much is new code going into production? And I think this is a fine balance. It would actually depend on how risky you are. As I say, the larger companies are being more cautious in terms of what they would actually put in production, as opposed to newer companies. But the technical debt you have to worry about is that if you don't understand the amount of code that has been put in production, you're gonna incur that debt when something goes wrong. So it'll actually vary and depends on your use case, right? Most of the people that I've conversed in the community, they use the code mainly for testing, mainly for writing for testing, for iterating over that. We are not at a point where the product manager, here's a PRD, and you're going to take that PRD and you're going to ask Claude to do it. No, it's not happening that way. I think we're far away from it. We're far away. I doubt if anybody is, right? For small apps, people might be doing it, but wipe code is sort of the new catnip that people are using it, and I think it's take a while before people will have the full confidence to do that, right? Yeah.
Came up during the Hadoop days. So back then, maybe like a handful of engineers
Yes.
can implement quite a Hadoop-like distributed system. Now we know all these coding agents are learning so much from the code. That's diminishing right now. Anybody could go and say, write me like a Spark 4.0.
I think what the question is that how much is it leveling the field, right? In the early days, you really had to be very well skilled in order to write a distributed system, right? Are you going to be able to tell Cloud Code today where we are, go ahead and write a distributed system like Spark? I don't know. I wouldn't have the confidence to do that, right? Same thing, would I actually trust 100,000 lines of code generated by Claude to put it in production, right? I would have to understand that. But people are using small amounts of it where they can actually verify and confirm it. But I wouldn't take the entire new feature and then put it in production. I would have to have real good confidence to do that. And people are learning through wipe coding. If I'm going to take that and put it in production, what my risk? Do I understand the code? If you have the confidence to understand the code and verify it in that particular cycle, then people will start putting it in production, right? I mean, if you went to Stack Overflow and cut and paste and put it in production, I don't see reason why somebody won't do it in small cases, right? But the large system that require a fair amount of complexity, I would scratch my head on that one. Not that I have much hair left. Yeah.
I have a comment and a question. The comment part of it is today itself, one of our marketing person, he needed to update the website and the report to do that, and he was looking for the engineer, and the engineer was too busy. He said it would take 2 days or 3 weeks. He went for ask for a code and it worked and put it in the web and it
well, I mean, there's certain. You're right. The question was that there are certain applications you can actually have confidence to do that. I think web apps is one of them because it's very easy to change something. I mean, it's not going to kill somebody's life if you actually, you click on a link and it doesn't work, right? But those kinds of applications, people actually are doing wipe coding today. And what it allows you to do is to get started very quickly. Right? You can take a picture of a GUI. They say, go ahead and create my Streamlit application based on this particular picture, and Cloud Code will generate the ability code. So you would get the particular framework, And then you would start putting in things like that. Think about early days when we had, remember okay, I'm going to date myself again. In the early days, we had X GUI and we had X Windows, right? And we were writing all the X code ourselves, right? How do you guys create a window manager? How to do that? Then they had GUI developers that actually created stubs for you, right? So you created all the stubs, and what you added in was the logic. This is not very dissimilar to that, right? It is just at a different level. Yes. So the question is, as more and more information or more and more code is available that LLM can actually learn from, where does the creativity come from? Now you have to define what creativity is. Creativity is a way to look at old patterns to do a new way of things, right? That's what creativity is, right? You're going to look at old patterns, but then you're going to say, okay, I've seen all this pattern, but here's a new way to do that. So the new way is where the LLMs have actually come about. It will use these old patterns to do a new way of doing things. How do we? I mean, if you look at drug discovery today, right? The claims by pharmaceuticals that they're actually using the AI to generate new discoveries, and the reason they are being able to do that because it can actually rearrange all the atomic biological structure to figure out, will this particular work? And now you actually have a new way of doing things. So the creativity is actually generated from the fact that you're taking all ways that you know, but somehow you rearrange things in a way that you do that. It is the same way, if I'm going to write a paragraph sentence, and I've seen this sentence so many times, I have a topic sentence and I have each sentence follow the next sentence. But then can I actually come up with a new paragraph that actually does the same thing? It doesn't lose the essence, but a new way of doing things. Right? So the writer will come up with a new way of doing things. Why? Because he's seen all this. He has read all these particular books, and he has seen how a sentence structure works. But he said, I'm going to change this so that I'm going to have the emphasis over here, or I'm going to have less emphasis over here. And that's sort of a new way of doing things. It's the same old thing. I'm just rearranging it. Now, insight and wisdom are something that people can debate endlessly. Will we ever come to the point where LLM will actually have the sentiment or the sentient to be able to actually think the way humans think about intuition? I don't know. That's a debate. That's an ongoing debate, and I don't have the answers. I'm not qualified to even give that answer. But that's a good question. That's a good question. Yeah. Hmm. The question is, which industries will benefit most? Top three industries that will actually benefit a lot. Software development is probably one of them, right? Because a lot of emphasis is actually being based on creating new products and using that. That's going to be first thing. A lot of industries that actually have tedious tasks that can be automated, customer support, travel agencies, all those agents is another one to do that. The last one is probably going to be fintech because people are still sort of playing around with it. People just don't have that much of confidence. But you hear about bullish statements, the agents are going to do everything, right? Well, agents are not going to, you're not going to give a fucking credit card to an agent. You're not going to do that. Agents don't have the credit card, right? So I think they're going to be, it's going to be a while to do that. But I think software development, customers, front end analysis about websites and all that, that's going to have the largest impact. But to me, obviously, if you're writing a new product, and whether the product is a web app or a product is a backend or a product is a chatbot or a product is doing some analysis, whatever that industry is, it will affect that. Any other question? Yeah.
You mentioned that enterprises are slow in adapting, right?
Yes.
So what do you think the tool developers need to? What's the immediate?
I mean, within the large industries, people are sort of they know that they have to adopt. Otherwise, they're going to be left behind, right? They want to do the right thing, but they want to do the right thing by experimenting first, right? They're not just going to gung ho do that. The bullish companies like AI startups can risk that, but the established companies are doing slowly and gently.
Is it a limitation in tools, or like they are taking time to experiment and adapt it because?
I mean, they have groups within the organizations who are at the forefront of experimenting thing, right? And then they actually propose that to their engineers and to these executives to say, okay, this is the way to go, right? So banks like some of the banks are actually looking into it, but they're a little more cautious about it because there's a lot of governance, there's a lot of all these other issues that actually have to deal with. But for software developers, who give a shit about that, right? They just want to write code and they just want to put it out there. Yes, you had a question.
How do you think about education market in future time? How change this industry of this AI?
I mean, this is a good question. How is the education market? And I think I probably wanted to add that to that. Education market is debating a lot, right? So the higher education universities, some universities are saying you can't use LLM to do that. Some universities are saying yes, you should actually use that, but make sure that you put your own voice into that. The education market has changed because it is helping you to learn things, right? As Ryan pointed out, that it helped him to learn something that he actually didn't know about, right? And so that gives you the empowerment and the agency to learn something on your own rather than waiting to do that. I think, like I said, we're still early days. There's going to be a lot of debate in academia who's going to be able to use that. I mean, it sort of reminds me of early days when we were using calculators. When calculators came into the prominent classroom, was saying you can't use calculators. When I started going to computer science today, my numerical analysis was a requirement to use Texas Instruments to be able to do integrals, right? So I think that's going to change. And like I said, we are still early.
More personalization.
Yes, I mean there's going to be more personalization. And companies are saying, yeah, agentic is going to be like a personal AI, right? All these different companies are saying you're going to have a super intelligent AI agent, which is going to be your personal thing. I mean, those are good, those are good things to think about. Are we there yet? I don't know, right? But it certainly is changing the world, the way we're actually doing things. And
How do you think your three best technology in
today,
for future next 10?
I mean, in the last 30 years, I think I saw going from mainframes to desktops, right? That was a big shift, and then we had the internet revolution, right, with the digitization of that, and now this is sort of the third one, and this is really, I mean, something that I've never seen this before. The pace at which and the velocity at which these things are changing, and how it's actually shifting things around. It's amazing, right? Yes, Suji. All right. I think we should end here. We could probably go all night, but thanks a lot for attending, and I hope I didn't bore you or scare you to death about your using your job.
Thank you.